Do you have a paranormal encounter you'd like to share with us? Send us an email with your story for a chance of it being featured on Weird World. From a homeless man's mind-bending journey to Victorian-era Birkenhead during the height of the pandemic, to a couple's surreal vision of a Pennsylvania shopping centre's past while on a road trip, the following are two more authentic and compelling accounts that demonstrate the fascinating and mysterious phenomenon of time slips. Birkenhead backtrack. It was late March 2020 and the pandemic had brought Birkenhead, a town in the metropolitan borough of Wirral, Merseyside, to a standstill. During this time, a 45-year-old homeless man named Gavin found himself wandering its quiet and empty streets, searching for a place to lay his head for the night. Gavin had been living on the streets for the past 3 years, ever since his drinking problem had worn out the patience of his friends and left him with nowhere to go. Although he had heard rumours of schemes to provide emergency accommodation for the homeless during the pandemic, so far no one had reached out to him. As he walked along Oxton Road, heading towards Grange Road, Gavin hoped to find his old school friend George, who he believed might be living in a flat above a shop. Gavin was trusting George wouldn't turn him away in his time of need. He bowed his head against the icy wind, his scarf wrapped tightly around his neck, and his old tweed jacket buttoned up to the collar. In his hand he clutched the strap of a satchel containing his handful of possessions: a £5 note, a small radio with a dying battery, a pair of lost reading glasses, some underwear and socks, and a copy of the book Jonathan Livingston Seagull. But before Gavin could reach his destination, something extraordinary happened. Suddenly the quiet streets erupted with noise, the sound of people's voices, the clip-clop of horses' hooves, and the trundling of carts filled the air. The sun, which had been hidden behind a thick layer of clouds just moments before, now blazed down from a clear blue sky, making Gavin feel as though he had been transported to a distant land. At first, Gavin thought he might have somehow ended up in Spain, but as he looked around, he realised that his surroundings were vaguely familiar. The McDonald's restaurant that had stood on the corner was gone, replaced by a large public house. He was still in the Charing Cross area, but it was clear that he had somehow been transported back in time, possibly to the Victorian era. Gavin's initial instinct was to seek shelter in the pub that now stood where McDonald's had been. But before he could take a step, a policeman appeared in his path. The officer looked Gavin up and down with steely pale blue eyes which seemed to glow under the shade of his peaked helmet, zeroing in on Gavin's satchel. "Where are you from?" the policeman asked, his voice filled with suspicion. Gavin took a deep breath and replied, "Look, officer, you're not going to believe this, but I am from the year 2020. The words sounded ridiculous even to his own ears, and Gavin felt his initial optimism at feeling the warmth of the sun on his face give way to a growing sense of dread as he realised the gravity of his situation. The policeman narrowed his eyes and said, "That's a right tall tale you're spinning. Reckon you better start talking or it's off to the clink with you. Name and business sharpish." Gavin hesitated for a moment before responding, "My name's Gavin Mitchell, and I used to live on Claremont Road in Wallasey about 3 years ago. I don't have a business nowadays. I'm homeless. I used to be a computer programmer." He knew that the last part of his statement would be meaningless to the policeman, who would have no idea what a computer programmer was, but he couldn't think of anything else to say. The officer pushed his helmet back slightly and scratched his forehead. "Well, I dare say I've never encountered such a far-fetched load of poppycock in all my years. Are you quite in your right mind, sir, or have you taken leave of your senses?" Gavin felt his mouth go dry as he replied, "I know it sounds crazy, but I'm telling the truth." Just then a shout rang out from behind the policeman, and he tilted his head to see two men fighting outside the pub Gavin had been heading toward, the Grange Hotel. The officer, who had himself turned around, turned back to Gavin and said, "You are to stay here while I go and deal with them. Got that?" He pointed to a small traffic island before running off to break up the brawl. Gavin stood rooted to the spot for a moment, his mind racing as he tried to make sense of what was happening. Then, seeing his chance, he took off down Grange Road, desperate to put as much distance between himself and the policeman as possible. The thought of being trapped in a grim cell in some Victorian-era police station terrified him. As he ran, Gavin narrowly avoided colliding with a bizarre contraption, a man on a bicycle towing a rickshaw-like vehicle occupied by a woman wearing an enormous hat adorned with artificial flowers. He kept running, his heart pounding in his chest, until he found himself on Conway Street. It was there that he encountered two rough-looking young men. They approached Gavin and demanded to know what was in his satchel. "Nothing of any value, just clothes," Gavin replied, knowing what was coming next. "Gizzard here," one of them said, snatching the satchel from Gavin's grasp. He turned to his friend and asked, "Shall we take his coat, Johnny?" But before they could make a move, a man emerged from a nearby pawnbroker's shop and called out to the ruffians, "Return that back to this man, or I'll inform that policeman down there." The man referred to as Johnny threw the satchel at Gavin's feet, and he and the other man slunk off down an alleyway. The man from the pawnbroker's approached Gavin and asked, "You all right, sir?" He explained that he was one of the proprietors of the shop and advised Gavin to go and speak to the policeman in the distance. "The big fellow who wanted your bag was John Rimmer. He's well known to the police." Gavin thanked the man profusely, but had no intention of approaching the policeman, given his bizarre situation. Instead, he asked a question that must have seemed very strange to the man. "I know this may sound odd, but what year are we in now?" "Eh?" the puzzled Good Samaritan replied. Thinking quickly, Gavin said, "I had a knock on the head, and I can't remember what year it is." "It's 1909, the man replied, advising Gavin to see a physician. The shock of hearing the year sent a wave of dizziness that washed over Gavin, and in an instant he found himself back in 2020, standing on the same street he had been on before his incredible ordeal. Not long after his return, Gavin fell ill with COVID-19, and as he lay sick in bed, a worrying thought occurred to him. Could he have unwittingly passed the virus on to the policeman or the ruffians he had encountered back in 1909? A decade's drive. One late afternoon in October 2022, as the sun was beginning to set, Emily and her partner Michael were driving along a highway in Pennsylvania, just north of Philadelphia and close to the New Jersey border. The couple had been together for 5 years and often enjoyed taking road trips to explore new places and create new memories. As they cruised along the highway, a thicket of trees on the left side of the road caught Emily's attention. The dense trees briefly gave way to a small strip mall shopping centre with a parking lot. Emily could make out the exterior of the shopping centre. The neon signs of some of its shop fronts were glowing, and the parking lot was nearly empty except for a couple of cars. However, as they continued past the trees, its appearance once again became obscured. As another clearing in the trees came into view, she peered through again, curious to get another look. What Emily saw in that brief moment left her stunned. The modern shopping centre she had witnessed just moments earlier seemed to suddenly shift to having an entirely different exterior. The parking lot looked like a scene from the 80s or 90s, now packed with old boxy cars parked in a now seemingly cleaner and better maintained space. The neon signs that had adorned the storefronts just moments before were also now suddenly absent. And part of the facade of the shopping centre building now appeared as if it was being prepared for renovations, with scaffolding and construction fencing in place around some of it. Emily blinked, trying to process what she had just witnessed. The vision lasted only a split second before it seemed to blend back into the present day, leaving her questioning whether her mind was playing tricks on her. She turned to Michael, who she assumed would have been entirely focused on driving, and hesitantly shared what she had seen. To Emily's surprise, Michael revealed that he had experienced the same vision at the exact same moment, but had himself also dismissed it as a trick of the eyes. The couple fell silent for a moment, trying to make sense of the extraordinary phenomenon they had both witnessed. As they continued their journey, Emily and Michael couldn't shake the eerie feeling that had settled over them. They had always been open-minded about the possibility of paranormal experiences, but neither had ever encountered something quite like this before. In the days that followed, Emily took to the internet to research the shopping centre and its history. She discovered that the strip mall had indeed undergone renovations in the late 1990s, just as she had suspected based on what she had noticed in her vision. The facade had been updated, and more prominent signage seemed to have been added by many of the stores, including the neon ones that now adorned some of its storefronts.